All right. So I think we're live. I tried to do this last week and found that midway through the stream, but I only found this out afterwards that my audio had muted. So I think we fixed it for this week. We are in temporary studio. We are back in live studio in about 10 days' time. So I want to dive into two subjects. And the first one I'm going to dive into is the one that I actually touched on last week. And it's a very interesting story that came out of the Financial Times. So hat tip there to the Financial Times for this piece. But it was a really interesting article on AI and the origins of AI and where it was discovered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bounce over to the article and we'll talk a little bit about it there. So the Financial Times wrote this article, at least the author in the Financial Times wrote this piece, and started to talk about this. And the interesting piece and the focus on this article wasn't on AI only, but it was really the origins of AI and the scientists who had spent so much time kind of coming up with it. And there were a couple of things that I'll largely focus on in the article here for you. 2017, so the pieces I'm going to highlight here. 2017, a couple of researchers were looking at machine learning, machine translation, and what ultimately became the AI engine. They've been working with a couple of other colleagues. They ended up having an insight that would really start to transform machine learning and how we were able to start applying what we were learning or what they were learning. So, as happens during their hallway chat, and I think this is kind of interesting, right? A little spontaneous conversation that happens when they're in the office. It could probably have happened online too, but this one happened in the office. They were overheard by a third person. Now, the overheard by can't happen when you're remote because that's kind of things that are happening perhaps synchronously. You don't have these hallway conversations. So there's a little bit of an insight here, and I'm not suggesting this is not about a work from home or a work remote strategy, but there is something interesting about the fact that two people having a conversation get heard by a third person in the hallway. Okay, great. They jump in, and I'm going to highlight this piece here, right? He said, I'm with you, let's do this. It's going to make life much, much better for all AI researchers. So they start to identify something that they think could be potentially quite transformative. It goes on, and ultimately it is transformative to the point that they call it the transformer. A couple of people start playing a role, and what's also interesting here is that they get an intern who is interested in the subject, wants to get involved. An intern, normally, you kind of think about the levels of hierarchy in an organization, and an intern's probably not going to be playing a significant role in researching AI, one of the cutting edge technologies. But this ultimately happens here. What is significant about this transformer piece, and I'm also going to highlight this, today the transformer underpins most cutting edge applications of AI in development. It's embedded in Google Search and Translate, for which it, of course, was invented, but also it powers almost all of the large language models, including those behind ChatGPT and Bard, and we use it on our phones, on our mobile keyboard, speech recognition, and everything. Whether that's Alexa on our Amazon devices or OK Google on our Google devices. Great. So this team comes together, they start working on something, and they very spontaneously form this. They come up with a transformer. It goes on to be massive. So you kind of think to yourself, that's pretty interesting. Not only the origins, but where are they today? Well, this is what's interesting. The article itself goes into a little bit more detail. But here's the piece that kind of struck me, right? It highlights how Google has evolved into now being this large bureaucratic organization. And this is what so many companies experience. Where entrepreneurialism used to flourish, and they could get products out the door quickly, but now they've got to the point where they are such a bureaucracy. In fact, all 8 of those original minds around AI have left the organization. So I think the interesting part in all of this is really now to start kind of considering, well, what does that mean for organizations? What does that mean for us, right? Because there's a significant piece here where we want to say, if we're a big company and we've got to the point where we're no longer having these hallway conversations, and 2 people can't become 3, and 3 can't become 8, and you can't just plug people in to help work on the next challenge, what are we missing? Our ability to disrupt ourselves, our ability to kind of look outside of what we're doing in the immediate term becomes stifled because we become so consumed with politics, with processes, with procedures, and so on and so forth. And getting work done starts to become almost the job, as opposed to kind of doing the innovation and doing the good stuff that led to, obviously, something that's so fundamental with regard to technology. So I think it's really interesting from the point of view of AI and the evolution of AI. I think it's really interesting with a lens on teams coming together to get work done, and also how big companies either can accommodate and basically create an incubator type environment where these ideas can thrive and people can work on what is important, or stifle them to the point of bureaucracy taking over and people just getting fed up and saying, I'm going somewhere else. And what is interesting, if you have a read of the article, and I'll put a link in it a little bit later in the piece as well, you'll actually come to see that most of the people went off to either work for startups or their own startup, or had an idea that they could have potentially pursued at Google, but they chose not to. Okay, the second story is one that fascinated me as well. So we'll dive back in and we'll talk a little bit about kind of what this is. But it was the story. Bed Bath & Beyond is back from the dead. That's a highly non-creative headline from CNN. You can see these journalists. I mean, I kind of think they think alike. Bed Bath & Beyond, the grave. I mean, so back from the dead, beyond the grave. The point being, a couple of months ago, Bed Bath & Beyond declared bankruptcy, and I wrote a piece that was picked up by LinkedIn News and kind of went pretty wild on just kind of what the leadership team at Bed Bath & Beyond must have been going through, and that, of course, after their CFO had committed suicide, unrelated or related, not sure. The point of this is that Bed Bath & Beyond had tried to reposition themselves. They had tried to remain relevant. They had a brand that consumers were attracted to. They had the coupons that arrived. And if you're an international viewer, you probably wouldn't have experienced this, but frequently in our mailboxes, our physical mailboxes, we get these big giant coupons offering us 20, 30, 40% off your most expensive item. And people loved those coupons. Back to school shopping or back to college shopping, a lot of it was done through Bed Bath & Beyond. They partnered up with the colleges. You could get your list of what you needed, and you could buy the stuff online and leave it in the store and pick it up wherever you were going to college. So it was great. They served a really good consumer demographic there. But the piece that I find interesting is that in a conversation with Jonathan Johnson, who is the CEO of Overstock.com, they talked about this really interesting transformation that had happened at Overstock.com. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what they ultimately went ahead and did. And I'm going to draw it out. So I'm going to look down at my iPad just for a second here. So if we consider two dimensions in this whole equation, right? We're going to consider the dimension of initially of business model. Let me get that right. Of your business model, right? And we're going to consider the dimension of your brand. Now, your business model either, let's just say it works, or it does not work, right? See where we're going. We're going to create a nice little 2x2 here. And so that's your business model that either works or it doesn't work, and your brand. And let's do the same thing with our brand. Our brand either doesn't work. It's not that easy writing on an iPad, I'll say. Or it works, right? What they identified is they actually had an interesting situation where what they had was, let's just say, Bed Bath & Beyond. Let's start with them. Bed Bath & Beyond went bankrupt, yet their brand was loved. Their coupons were beloved. People loved going into the stores for the most part. There were a lot of people who became disenchanted with it over time. But what they did is they realized that the business model did not work, right? So they've clearly positioned somewhere down in this domain down here, in the does not work space. But the brand did work. People loved it. So we found that Bed Bath & Beyond, I get this right, Bed Bath & Beyond was kind of there. It was positioned as a good brand, but not so much of a good business model. They had infrastructure, they had real estate, they had huge inventory that was just sucked up into these stores, and obviously impacted their working capital and cash flow. On the other hand, you had Overstock.com, which about 20-some years ago started off as a liquidator. In other words, things that couldn't be sold anywhere else went to Overstock. It was where companies had too much stock, so they would sell it, and you'd usually get it for less. So they started off as a liquidator, but they moved beyond that, but they could never get beyond that, right? Because their brand was associated with being Overstock. So their brand really didn't work. but their business model did. They had no retail outlets. They had inventory that was put in warehouses in cheap locations that didn't have to be gussied up for consumers. And so you had a business model that worked, but a brand that did not, which means that we put overstock kind of up there, right? The business model works, but the brand doesn't work. So let's just call that out for a second. You've got a business model that works for overstock, but a brand that doesn't work. And in Bed Bath & Beyond's case, you've got a brand that works and a business model that doesn't. And the hypothesis is that we're going to now transform this business, this new company, so let's put it as our new co, up here where the business model works and the brand works. And I find this to be a fascinating combination. And it makes me think about all those other retailers who probably wish that for, I think it was 22 million is what Overstock paid for Bed Bath & Beyond. Now, if you know anything about branding, you know it takes a long time to get a brand established, to build a brand, to build a following. With a mere $22 million, Overstock were able to get all of Bed Bath & Beyond's customers and that brand. And if you today try and type in overstock.com, it's going to take you, well, it'll take you straight in. Let's actually try this. Let's try this, right? We'll go back here and we'll go, I'm going to type in overstock.com. Takes us straight there. Oh, look at that. It takes us straight back to Bed Bath & Beyond. And at the top of the screen, you'll see a coupon, right? Let's get out of the sign in. We don't need to do that. But there's a huge coupon. And that was another big part of why people loved Bed Bath & Beyond. They had these coupons. And so Jonathan Johnson, the CEO, as I said, of Overstock, has said that what they're going to do now is they're going to keep the coupon because people love the coupon. So the coupon's not gone. We all thought it would be. It's not gone. And in fact, what they've done is they've been able to really regain a focus on that consumer. So I think it's a masterful play. They've been able to change their whole business model. They're not going to have bricks and mortar stores. They've acquired, they have a model that works. They have a brand that works. It'll be really interesting to see how this goes. So what's this got to do with ambition? Well, I think what's interesting is that Overstock could have looked at this and gone, what do we do now that Bed Bath & Beyond is gone? Well, maybe we try and buy some SEO. We play into the space. There's a gap now in that market. Instead, they went after it, and someone very creative, and whoever consulted them should probably be paid a bit more to say, hopefully maybe a more internal person, but the idea that you can simply go and capture that entire demographic and work on it in time is going to be incredibly powerful. So I think the aspirations of Overstock.com to become much more than just Overstock, and to go from Bed Bath to a lot more beyond is just fantastic. I'm going to be interested to see what the user experience is like, what the app is like, how does it compare to others like Wayfair and so on. But for now, I think it's a really key insight that Overstock had to try and play into the Bed Bath & Beyond space. Okay, so that's it for this week. I'm going to try and come to you every Friday with things that are pretty interesting in the previous week's news and kind of what we hear and what we don't hear, to try and dive into a little bit more of what we can take from that and the courage that we can probably have and the confidence that we need to have around our own businesses as we lead our teams through any kind of transformation, but certainly ones that are big, bold, and ambitious, because ultimately that's really what this is all about. So have a great weekend wherever you are. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know. Find me either here on LinkedIn, or you can find my contact info on my profile. I'd love to connect. Have a great weekend.